Good morning, Rat.
This is the 5th episode of The Sopranos, titled College. In this episode right here, it is, in my opinion, the most important episode of TV in at least the last 25 years. That's right, I'm switching to hot takes. Hot takes only on the old skip intro. Whether you've ever seen an episode of The Sopranos or not, I'm willing to bet you've heard how great it was. I mean, geez, some people never shut up about how great it is. Part of that hype is the show's individual brilliance, but a lot of it has to do with the show's legacy. The Sopranos introduced the stylings of classic mob films like Goodfellas and The Godfather to the small screen, and the show vaulted HBO into the industry juggernaut it is today. But what is perhaps the show's longest lasting legacy, the one we felt more strongly than any other in the 20 years since it aired, is the way The Sopranos constructed the TV anti-hero.
You alright?
My leg's broken, the bone's coming through.
We're pretty used to this style of TV show today. Think about how many of the iconic TV shows of the 21st century have been centered around an anti-hero or troubled man. You have Breaking Bad, Dexter, The Shield, Boardwalk Empire, House of Cards, Ozark, 24, and Mad Men. All shows that have been nominated for multiple Emmy Awards. Nowadays, we don't think twice about binging 10 hours of a show centered around a character doing, at best, morally dubious things. But in 1999, the idea of asking an audience to tune in week to week and root for a bad guy was totally foreign. For decades before this, TV protagonists had been upstanding citizens, doctors, lawyers, and righteous police officers. Don't worry, I'm working on the next episode of Copaganda. Don't worry. You will get your spooky cops, I promise. The Sopranos sought to deconstruct that hero archetype. Somewhat famously, The Sopranos was only given 2 notes during its 6 seasons on HBO. The first was its name. The network was worried that people might think this was a show about opera singers. The second note was about this episode, College, and about this scene in particular, where Tony strangles a former police informant in cold blood.
Jimmy says hello from hell, you
Up to this point in the series, we've known Tony as a mobster. We've seen him okay hits on rival gang members. We've seen him commit arson. We've seen him beat people up. But this was different. This is Tony Soprano murdering a man while touring colleges with his daughter and enjoying it. This is a pivot point for TV history, not just because of what happens in this episode, but also because of what comes next. College sits on the precipice of the TV revolution, so today I want to talk about it. How it would come to define the next 2 decades of television, and how that legacy reflects the changes in American culture surrounding the show. I'm Jackson, and this is The Sopranos. A TV show or episode can't be important if it doesn't resonate. So let's just start by talking a little bit about what's actually in this episode and what makes it a good episode of TV. College is a pretty straightforward premise for an episode. Tony is touring colleges in Maine with his daughter Meadow. On the trip, she confronts him about being in the mob, and he comes kind of clean with a half-truth.
Look, some of my money comes from illegal gambling and whatnot.
This honesty brings Tony and Meadow closer. But while at a gas station, Tony spots an old colleague turned informant in witness protection. After confirming that this is his rat, Tony ditches Meadow at another tour and runs off to, well, murder him. Meanwhile, Tony's wife Carmela is back home sick in New Jersey. Her favorite priest pops over for some baked ziti, and the two share an intimate night of flirtatious drinking before Carmela admits her complicity in Tony's evil deeds.
I think he has... Well, you know all about him, Father Phil. But I'm the same. I've said nothing. I've done nothing about it. It's just a matter of time before God compensates me with outrage for my sins.
When it's all said and done, Tony and Carmela have walked up to epiphanies. Tony reaches a new level of honesty with his daughter, and Carmela understands how she enables evil acts, only for both of these characters to completely abandon change altogether. The headline of this episode, its climactic shocking moment, is Tony killing the rat Febby Petrulio. It's really hard to overstate how big a swing this was for a TV show at the time. To be clear, it's not a main character killing that's itself unprecedented. Early cop shows like Dragnet and The Naked City featured cops having to kill in self-defense. Things got a little more morally gray in the 80s, like when Tom Selleck shot an unarmed man at the end of a Magnum P.I. episode.
You could shoot me if I was armed. and coming after you. But like this, Thomas, never.
Magnum and his wonderful mustache weren't cops, but this was a killer who was going to go free and kill some more people because of diplomatic immunity or something. It was the 80s, who knows. The point is, this wasn't revenge. It was for the greater good, to prevent future crime. It was also a little bit of revenge, but whatever. But what Tony does isn't a righteous kill. It's not self-defense, it's straight up murder. In fact, the episode goes to great lengths to remove any convenient outs that TV usually gives a character in his situation. First, there's no need for Tony to kill this man. Christopher even pleads to come up to Maine and take care of it himself.
You wanna fly up and take care of it?
You're a good kid.
Second, there's no ticking clock for this hit to happen. Febby is being punished for squealing more than a decade before.
Maid guy, he fucked about 10 years ago when he got busted for peddling H.
Third, Tony learns that Febby has a new family and a young daughter.
Daddy's gonna come too, sweetie. We'll both put you to bed.
And finally, Tony has his own daughter to ostensibly worry about. Of course, Tony disregards all of those things. He carries out the hit himself, immediately, with no remorse for Febby's family or his own. The only reason that's left for Tony to kill this guy is that he's a rat. And in Tony's world, rats need to be killed. It all culminates in an unflinching 1 minute and 16-second scene of grunting and strangulation. It's pretty brutal to watch, even by today's standards. This is the whole point of the episode, to make it clear that Tony is a bad dude and to confront us with our role in the story. This is a character the audience has already invested time in, a character we're made to empathize with, and here we're watching him relish in murder. At HBO, to say this was a contentious decision would be an understatement. Critic Alan Sepinwall captures the internal debate between creator David Chase and executive Chris Albrecht in his book The Revolution Was Televised, writing, "David, you can't do this. He can't kill this guy. You haven't earned it yet. The audience is going to hate him. It's the 5th episode. Wait till the end of the season. If Tony were to find this guy and doesn't kill him, he's full of and therefore the show's full of Ultimately, Chase did decide on one concession. A short scene where we see that Febby is dealing drugs in Maine and that he tries to hire 2 junkies to kill Tony and Meadow.
You pull up alongside, boom, 12 gauge. Fuck that. Lon, you do what I ask, so you'll never get another bag off me.
David Chase said afterwards that he wished he hadn't done this concession. And it's a scene that feels tonally different than the rest of the episode. I mean, it feels like a note from the network asking to make the kill slightly more acceptable or justified. After all, anyone can get behind bad people killing other bad people, but once we see Tony smile when he chokes the life from this guy's throat, you can feel how hollow that other scene is. Regardless of the internal debate, the gamble paid off. College was a smash success. It won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a Drama Series and was met with rave reviews. And it's the whole episode, not just this one scene that's great, that confronts our complicity or our willingness to compartmentalize Tony's actions. Back in Jersey, Carmela's story mirrors the same questions. Carmela drinks and flirts with Father Phil, at first complaining about Tony's infidelity before reaching a moment of transparent honesty, the mask of a mob wife falling away.
Because I wanted things for them. I wanted a better life, good schools. I wanted this house. Wanted money in my hands, money to buy anything I ever wanted.
Carmela has spent years of her life in willful ignorance. She knows about Tony's monstrous side, but she chooses to maintain the illusion. And in this episode, she reckons with that, repenting in what is a very sensual confession scene. You know what? Forget the murder scene. This scene is the real legacy of The Sopranos, making confessions sexy nearly 2 decades before Fleabag.
Just kneel.
That illusion of Tony the human isn't necessarily false. After all, he and Meadow do reach a deeper relationship in Maine. They come clean to each other and discover a new level of honesty and respect.
I'm glad you told me, in spite of everything.
Glad I did too. I'm glad we have that kind of relationship.
But both Tony and Carmela walk back their breakthroughs. Tony gives Meadow the cold shoulder when she asks him where he's been.
Dad, you're being honest with me, right?
Pretty soon here, you're gonna start hurting my feelings.
And Carmela blames the whole night with Phil on the wine.
We didn't do anything out of line.
There's nothing to apologize about.
The juxtaposition of these realizations and then willfully looking the other way is perhaps no more apparent than in the moment following Febby's murder. Tony walks away from the body, untangling the electrical wire from his bloody hands, and looks up to see a flock of ducks flying by. Something that was introduced in the pilot episode as a metaphor for his family.
I'm afraid I'm gonna lose my family. I think I lost the ducks.
Tony then picks Meadow up and they end their trip at Bowdoin College, where Tony looks up and sees a Nathaniel Hawthorne quote. No man, for any considerable period, can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude, without finally getting bewildered as to which may be true. The question of who Tony truly is will linger throughout the entire series, and the many other anti-hero shows that followed The Sopranos. In this episode, we see that tension on display in Tony's violent rage and his moments of genuine fatherhood with Meadow. We are forced to look at these two faces, the one Tony wears to his family and the one he wears to himself. In this episode, we are Carmela, choosing to believe in whichever Tony serves our purposes. So, great episode of TV, right? It's got layers to it. Shrek would be proud. I tried to write in so many jokes about how Tony Soprano is just Shrek because he's a layered hero and he kind of looks like Shrek, but this was the best I got. But just know there were a lot of other bad ones on the cutting room floor. Anyways, but what is it about this episode that changed TV? Why is it this one that's important? Why am I making this video? Why not the pilot of The Sopranos? And what about the other anti-hero shows? NYPD Blue, a police procedural that ran throughout the 90s, featured the emotionally troubled Andy Sipowicz. He would rough up perps, but he was a cop, a quote-unquote good guy. Oz premiered on HBO just 2 years before The Sopranos in 1997. And while that show was brutal, its protagonist was not a cold-blooded murderer. Tony is. This is the first time we see Tony kill someone himself, and the show is noticeably unapologetic about it. When Christopher kills someone in the show's pilot, the action is shown in quick cuts, and we never see Christopher and the victim in the same shot. But in this scene, the camera lingers on Tony strangling this man so hard that he cuts his own hands. While the pilot of The Sopranos introduced TV audiences to the idea of a central anti-hero, this is the episode that crystallized that idea. This character would come to define the next 2 decades of television drama. Television was no longer just for doctors, lawyers, and cops, and The Sopranos, with its commercial and critical success, gave a blueprint for one way to transcend those conventional TV stories: the anti-hero. But what makes College so interesting to look back on is how its approach to anti-heroes would be warped by the decades that followed. The Sopranos is a show about an interregnum, a period of flux for the mafia. RICO statutes are making the mob less viable. In one of the opening lines of the entire series, Tony bemoans that,
But lately I'm getting the feeling that I came in at the end. The best is over.
Many Americans, I think, feel that way.
His therapist, Dr. Melfi, is exactly right. As YouTuber Now You See It notes in his video about 1999 movies, the same year that The Sopranos debuted, the year produced nearly a dozen Hollywood films about characters struggling with the stagnation of their lives, usually in a cubicle setting.
1999 had this crazy phenomenon where nearly a dozen major Hollywood releases feature a main character tired of the stability, monotony, and uneventfulness of their life. And it's a perfect mirror of what America was like in the late 90s.
That's reflected in Tony's anxiety attacks brought on by his existential crises. In this way, Tony's murderous rage is a kind of wish fulfillment, a thrill-seek, in the same way that Neo becomes a revolutionary or Edward Norton starts a fight club. The thing that's different from those movies and TV, and in this case, specifically The Sopranos, is that the show wasn't locked into 1999. The show kept going until 2007, and that means it bridged the gap between 2 different Americas, pre-9/11 and post-9/11. After 9/11, there was suddenly a national call, craving for these kinds of characters, for people who would do the bad things that needed to be done. 24 and The Shield premiered within 6 months of 9/11, taking the Tony Soprano model of a man-of-action anti-hero and combining it with the police. Those shows hinged on the idea of weighing ends and means and trying to find justice. After them would come Dexter, a show about a serial killer hunting other serial killers as an outlet for his aggression, and not so coincidentally, was adapted for TV by the co-writer of College, James Manos Jr. Breaking Bad is probably the most famous of these shows, streamlining the anti-hero tragedy, showing a chemistry teacher who slowly learned to embrace his inner Tony Soprano and impose his power.
A guy opens his door and gets shot and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
Breaking Bad placed its audience firmly in Walt's perspective, in a way that you could almost justify every time he swallowed hard and took another step towards outright villainy. By the end, we were able to see who Walt really had been all along, but we had followed him through each one of those incremental steps. I think this episode of The Sopranos, by stripping out any kind of legitimacy to Tony's actions, gets to the root motivation for all of these anti-hero shows: retribution. Before 9/11, we might have excused these actions as thrill-seeking, and afterwards we might have excused them as a necessary evil. But I think both of those ideas are, to steal Nathaniel Hawthorne's quote, masks to either the multitude or to ourselves. The underlying motive has always been that these characters needed to make someone hurt like they hurt. And I think that idea was especially intoxicating and took off as the country processed its pain throughout the 2000s. But it started here. College laid the groundwork, and then history and culture took it and ran with it. This episode captures a moment in time, an Emmy Award-winning episode of TV that crystallized the central anti-hero as a thing, a convention that would be morphed by a changing America and would become the most popular style of drama storytelling for the next 2 decades. And it all started right here. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please share, like, and subscribe, baby! Don't worry, I'll be back soon with Copaganda. I just had a lot of shows to watch for it, and it's taking a while. So in the meantime, I wanted to keep you guys all fed with new content, so I worked on this video, which has been bumming around in my head for a while. If you're getting impatient for the next episode of Copaganda, let me tell you about my Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that makes it possible for me to put in the work to make the channel the best it can be. You can get early access to videos, a monthly newsletter, blog posts, and monthly Q&As. It's super cool, I promise. Thanks again, and I will be on your computer screen again soon. Or right now, why don't you just watch another video? You can get more of me, I promise.